Welcome everybody to the presentation of the Carbon Working Group of the REH, Réseau Environnement Humanitaire. I'll let Joanna do the introduction and then we'll...
Thank you.
So
hi everyone. Thank you, Nora, for letting us know about the chat. I changed a setting. Maybe it works now, but for some people it doesn't work. Okay, it works now. Perfect. So thank you all for joining. I think I've seen some of your names, so I think some of you already know me, but just in case, I'm Joanna. I'm a researcher at Groupe URD, and I'm the coordinator of the REH. And maybe I'll let the other presenters introduce themselves, Camille, and then we can start.
So Camille, I'm responsible for environmental policies and action at Humanitarian Inclusion, and also the sort of facilitator of the Carbon Working Group within the REH. Julia, if you want to.
Hi everyone, I'm Julia. I'm the Sustainability and Carbon Footprint Analyst at Oxfam International and a member of the REH Carbon Working Group.
Hello
everyone, I'm Telio. I work at Électriciens Sans Frontières, so Electricians Without Borders in Paris, and I'm a projects officer and working since recently in the working group too.
I don't know if you want to present the agenda very quickly, Camille.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fairly simple agenda. So we're just going to present what we are doing at the REH and more specifically a bit of a history of who we are and what we do at the working group. And then dive a bit deeper into what we've done so far and what our objectives are for 2025, what are some of the challenges that we faced, and then we'll have some time for questions. But we also have planned for questions in the middle of the presentation, so please be prepared to participate.
Thank you. Just a quick note, if English is not your preferred language, you can turn on subtitles. To do so, you can click on the three little dots that are next to the little camera icon, turn on the subtitles, and then in the settings of those subtitles, you can choose the language in which you're most comfortable. So as Camille introduced, this session is organized by one of the working groups of the Humanitarian Environment Network, Réseau Environnement Humanitaire, REH. It's a network of Francophone humanitarian and development practitioners who are working together to reduce the environmental footprint of the aid. It's a network that's been around since 2012 with a restructuration in 2021. Such that now we have over 300 members, including more than 30 organizations. And what we have is that those different practitioners who would be, for example, technical advisors, climate and environment officers, logisticians, a wide variety of different practitioners are working together and are really operationalizing the different discussions through 4 working groups. So we have one on waste management, and each of those working groups have held a similar HNPW session. So if you're interested to know more about their work, the recordings are already available on the REH YouTube page. So there was one on waste management, one on carbon, which is the session that you're at today, one on sustainable procurement, and then one on environmental assessments. So if you want to know more, you can go check this out. And also just a note, you will receive the slides and minutes and recordings after the session, if that was one of your questions.
And I think all of the recordings will be available on the YouTube channel as well of the network, where you can also see some of our previous discussions and forums if you speak French. All right, so more specifically on the Carbon Working Group. So the Carbon Working Group was created in 2021, and it was initially a consortium of organizations who gathered together and basically had a big involved discussion about the reduction of their carbon footprint. some of those organizations signed commitments, the declaration statements. I can't remember the exact translation in English of the statements of commitments for the humanitarian
organizations for the climate.
For the climate. Sorry, thanks, Joanna. Aiming to reduce their carbon footprints by 50% by 2030. And then some other organization, part of the consortium, were wondering about this commitment and whether to commit or not. And so those organizations basically got together and decided that the first step was to assess the carbon footprint, and that they would be better equipped to do that if they were together. And so they contracted consultants together and worked on the carbon footprint for a year. And then basically based on that, we all then moved on to actually reducing our footprint, and then so in 2023 we became a proper working group of the REH and welcomed new organization and widened the purpose, since the initial purpose was just the carbon footprint assessment. And then we moved on to the reduction and also transfer of all the knowledge that we had built in that time. Since 2024, we've revised again the working group governance and clarified our objectives. And so basically our objectives are first peer-to-peer assistance on the technical topics. So one of those technical topics is how to assess your carbon footprint, but then we also talk a lot about what we can do to reduce our carbon footprints, obviously. And then our second objective is to produce tools and analysis to help decarbonization of everybody, like to share those tools and analysis with outside the working group, so that it can be helpful for the sector in general. Support the members in their decarbonization trajectories, and then generally build knowledge on carbon related topics. So you see the members of the working groups in the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. So so before we tell you a little bit more about what we did in 2024 and what we are aiming for in 2025, we thought it would be interesting to have a better understanding of who was there. So we are inviting you to join this Slido, to either on the website using the number or using the QR code directly, and then we'll have questions later. Don't worry, the QR code and number will stay up, so you can join at any time, even if you missed the first question. And the first question is, where are you joining us from, like physically? I'm in France, in Lyon, for example. But right, so Geneva in force, which like HNPW does take place in Switzerland, so that makes sense. But I see we have people joining from quite far away. And even from a shed in South London. If for some reason you can't access the Slido, you can gladly put your answer in the chat. But yeah. All right. So what type of organization do you work for? All right. So we have a big majority of NGOs so far, which makes sense. right. So mostly NGOs, networks, and then, all right, we have a consultant as well. All right, so no private company or donors today with us. It's okay. Or local NGO, which is fine. And did you know about this working group before today's session? Like, I know that some of you did because I'm recognizing some of the names from like last year and then from other meetings, but so interesting. Well, it's good to know that some of you didn't know about us before, and I'm glad to like this is also like the reason we do this session is to update people that are not a part of the working group and what we're doing, but also to hopefully reach some people who don't know we exist, so that we may maybe start working together. So great to see that we have people discovering us today. And then, so since most of you work for NGOs, I guess this question is especially relevant for you, but so has your organization already started on a carbon journey? So either assessment or reduction or both? Great results so far. Great. So I guess most of you have both done a carbon footprint assessment and taken action. So maybe you know you'll relate with some of the challenges that we face. But also, you know, part of this session, like the goal of this session is also to get your suggestions or, you know, asks for, start, like, so there's no option for we are in the process of assessing, like we are starting the assessment for me is like, you've started the process. But yeah, so if you have any, since most of you are at least engaged in like all of you are engaged in either action or assessment or both. If you have recommendation, if you have suggestions, if you think of some things that you'd like to see from the working group, then you know it's also interesting for us to know because there's 13 of us, but it's only 13, and you know, if we produce things that are useful for other organizations, then it's better. All right, next question. And yeah, last question, I think, and then we actually tell you what we do. Has your organization committed to reduction objectives? All right, so again, a majority of organizations with targets, and then some working on it. Okay. All right. So thank you for all this. So now that we know each other a little bit better, I'm going to try and tell you about what we did in 2024. And like as I said, I recognize some of you from last year's session. So sorry if you remember what we told you last year. Then there will be some repetition. So basically, in 2024, we had you know, sort of just welcomed a new organization. We had grown into a bigger group, and we had identified different topics that we wanted to work on, and we were full of enthusiasm and maybe a little bit of hubris with all of our new members. And so we decided to split into 3 sub-working groups that would work on different topics throughout the year, hopefully like in the hope of being a little bit more efficient and producing more. So one of the sub-working group was aiming to produce action guides. So basically wanting to share best practices, practical tips on actions to the decarbonization actions. And this sub-working group struggled a bit to identify which action to focus on, and then what type of information to produce. And by the time we had sort of gathered enough material, we also realized that a lot of other organizations are working on this, and like, for example, the Climate Action Accelerator is publishing a lot of decarbonization action tips and action information, and you can also find some in other places. And so basically we sort of shut down this sub-working group at that point, because you know, the goal of the working group is like we have limited time and resources, and so we don't want to double work on things that are already being done by other networks or other organizations. So this first working group was not a huge success. The second sub-working group that we identified was aiming to produce a specialized, like, thanks Nora, like lots of information on the REC website as well. So we wanted to work on a specialized workshop tailored for the aid sector, and help that would help to really focus on actions and building action plans in our field countries of operation. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in the next slides. And then we had a third working group more focused on purely the carbon footprint, because we always have new members who are joining and starting their carbon assessments, or old members who are doing their second carbon assessment and trying to improve calculation and versus the first one, and to compare with the first one, which has lots of challenges as well. And so that working group was more of a sort of technical internal information sharing and technical support, like peer-to-peer technical support, basically. And like so this was very helpful for, I think, internally the members of the working groups. And we also had times where we invited external actors on topics that were not as like where we didn't have a member that had specialized knowledge, like financing the transition or those kind of things. But as I said, we did face challenges in the this sub-working group organization, and then we did realize at the end of the year that a lot of the work and the support that we had provided was staying within the working group, and that we struggled to produce like formalize and share our work. And so at the end of the year, we looked at our purpose and priorities for 2025, and this will be what Telio will tell you about just after, so I'm not going to spoil it. But just before I hand it over to him, I just wanted to, next slide, to share a little bit about the workshop that we produced. So basically our goal with that was to develop a tool. So there are lots of options. There are options available for awareness raising workshop that focus on how to knowledge of how the climate change process works, or what are its causes and consequences, what actions you can take. But things that are that exist are usually focused on North countries, often very individual actions, and definitely they don't include a view of our field activities. And our field activities are really the core of where our carbon footprint, like our carbon emissions, come from. And we wanted something that would go beyond just raising awareness and help engage our field staff and focus on action, and something that could be widely used by the sector. So we had a first version that was developed last year and tested successfully. Like, it was very, actually very engaging. So what you see on in the picture, like the picture above, is the what the tool looks like. So you have a so it was developed by French research, public research agencies, and we adapted it for the aid sector. And it basically allows to represent the emission of a field, like a country, in a sort of like visual way, and turn it into a role play where you have logistic officers, technical experts, and I don't know, project managers that are trying to reduce the emissions of the mission of the country. And so that works very well. We tested it in 3 countries. It was based on the real carbon footprint of one of those countries, and in that specific country, it was very, very engaging. What you see below, like the really terrible graph that you can't read at all, shows the actions, so the carbon footprint at the beginning, and then on the right side, the little blue bar is what is left of the carbon footprint, and the yellow bars are what actions have been taken to reduce. So you see really like real actions that are taken and how much they reduce, they help reduce. And so based on that, we really built an action plan, and we are in the process of implementing that action plan. And so this really helped, like transform a sort of basic workshop into something that is really super understandable and clear for the staff. But the customization of the workshop is very time consuming, and facilitation still requires like a lot of technical knowledge. And so we are still aiming to improve those points before we can share it with the wider sector. Yeah, so I'll stop there and hand over to Telio for 2025.
Thank you, Camille. So the objectives for 2025 is basically to spread and share what we have been thinking and working a lot on internally the last year. So share these learnings with the wider community. For example, by summarizing and publishing guidances based on what our organizations have learned. For example, about the reduction trajectory and the relative or absolute value calculation of this trajectory. We are writing currently an explanatory sheet about these concepts that might help other organizations to understand what would be their best option as a goal to set for themselves between relative or absolute. We are also building a carbon toolkit, which I'm going to explicit a bit in the next slide, which would show and present all of our key findings and advices. It would be a guide to help organizations choosing the best existing tools for carbon computation and for action planning, for example. Then and mostly we're going to continue working on our reduction trajectories and targets, which I remind you is of 50% reduction by 2030. We've been questioning this objective this year because the more and more we work on it, the more we now see clearly that it is really hard to reach because of global economical and structural constraints. But still, each of our organizations have their own internal, also internal economical and structural constraints and their own way of treating the problem. So we're going to continue sharing about this for the next year. If you want to see more about these reduction trajectories and action planning, we also did a webinar on the topic. So there's the link in the chat. Yeah, Aline is saying it's not only hard to read, but also unfair. Yeah, we can elaborate on this concept if you want later. At the end of the presentation. And we're also mainly going to keep peer-to-peer support. So the idea is really to capitalize and share what each NGO develops and thinks about in their organization, and to invite and collaborate with external guests also, because the idea is really to spread the action and the capitalization. I'm going to develop a bit more about the carbon toolkit. So the idea of the carbon toolkit is to structure the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions within international solidarity organizations by equipping their members and members of any NGO, of the REH and of other NGOs too, with a carbon toolkit, which would be just a methodological tool supporting the NGOs with a harmonized computation of their carbon footprint. So as you can see on the bottom right of this slide, there's a huge number of existing tools in the market for the private sector. And this is only a list of some firms, some French firms on the market. So you can imagine that worldwide there's a whole bunch of them. The idea is to guide the NGOs towards the right existing tools and their use, and to adapt them maybe, or adapt the advices to the specificity of the sector. We know that carbon computation, carbon footprint computation and action planning is a really complex topic. Us, the NGOs and humanitarian organizations in general, don't really have a lot of pre-existing knowledge about. There's a huge existing quantity of everything about this, but our goal will be to create some guide that will also include all the lessons that we have learned during the last years, which can also include some specific aspects for each field of intervention of each NGO, and to include also all the sheets and guidances that we internally have developed. But for this, we're going to need a lot of, depending on the quality of the final result that we want, we're going to need some RH people dedicated to it, and some financial aid, basically.
I see that Nora has raised her hand. Maybe we can take the question. I assume this is to say that the REC also has a lot.
No. I made that point in the chat. Don't worry. Thanks, though. I wanted to say something else for the many tools that you have listed there. It's a little small, so I can't read it well, but that's okay. So the REC Coalition has a help desk. So we're getting a lot of, people can approach us. Oh, I have this technical question. I'm looking for this tool and so on. I'm not saying that to promote us. I'm saying that because for decarbonization, about half of the requests are in carbon calculation. So you are right, it is complex and people need a lot of assistance. Really, from what we see, the vast majority use the humanitarian carbon calculator. So that's really the tool that is, and I think it's only going to get more for various reasons. So I'm not sure. Do you sense that there is confusion in the community, that they don't know which tool to turn to? Because the humanitarian carbon calculator, from our perspective, would be a good entry point. And then, you know, any guidance could be specific to that. But is it different from what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think maybe we have, like, I'm sorry, I'll answer that because I've been in the carbon working group for longer than Telio, but I think maybe we have a bias in the working group because we started working on the topic before the humanitarian carbon calculator was out, and so a number of us are not using it. Because, like, for humanity and inclusion, we use the French, carbon bilan carbon tool, but just because, like, that was the one that we used in 2021, and like, it's just too much work to switch tools. But also, we've seen organizations who don't have internal resources dedicated to the accounting part. Like, you know, if you have very limited resources, you might want to have your internal resource focused on action, and maybe you can get some I don't know how to say that in English, like mécénat de compétences. I don't know if you know, or someone knows, like, but like, you know, when you get like basically a company doing pro bono work to help you on this part, and then usually they'll come with their tool. Or so we had some organization that also had those kind of options, and so they were wondering what were the pros and cons of going with that. And so this is something that we've been discussing internally, and that we wanted to share our thoughts and conclusions with the group. But yeah, I think now that the HCC exists and is kicking, like, for sure, and NGOs would tend to use that, especially if it's free. And
that being said, it is currently offline, just for you to note. It's being updated, so if anybody's looking for it, it's currently offline. But maybe just also one other point of information. The Climate Action Accelerator is working on a guideline on carbon calculation for the humanitarian community. Basically, they're trying to do what the Greenhouse Gas Protocol has done broadly for the world, but specific to the humanitarian community. And they're doing interviews at the moment. So I'm not sure what exactly their timeline is. I'm sure it's going to take a moment, because I think they really want to go to the level of depth that the Greenhouse Gas Protocol has done. But it's maybe still good to know if you want to get in touch with them.
Definitely. Thanks. Aline, you wanted to?
Yes, just to answer what Nora's said, the matter is not only about the tools that are used by organization, and we are fully aware that the humanitarian carbon calculator is a great tool and that could be used, but the point is to understand the methodology and to choose the methodology. Of course, first of all, the scopes that all the parts, the sources of emission that you want to include in your carbon accounting. And then it's the toughest part of the carbon accounting is related to the data collection, and it depends on your information system. And I think this cannot be solved by the humanitarian carbon calculator. And also what we stated through the REH Carbon Working Group is that the organization can follow different methodology, for example, including the cash transfer or not, or using a different emissions factor for cash transfers. And so it will bias the results, and then make the result difficult to even not compare, but at least to understand, and to understand why this organization succeeded in reducing their carbon footprint by X%, and why such the other one failed to reduce its carbon footprint. So I just wanted to add this point. And thank you very much for the information regarding the ongoing work of the Climate Action Accelerator. I think we should reach out to them. Thanks.
Yeah, and just to add, maybe that wasn't clear because we had to, like, basically this idea of a carbon toolkit is really, you know, us thinking we want to try and put together all the how-to guides that we would have loved to have when we started on our journey. And the how to choose your tool would just be one of those many, many things. And, you know, we just wanted to have an example. And so that's why we put it. But obviously, like, there's tons of other questions, and some of them have already been answered somewhere, but it's just maybe then would be gathering it in one place. And some we feel, you know, weren't answered, or you just have different options, and then we can provide information on how we thought about it, what we've discussed. And, you know, maybe there's no good or like the example that Telio was sharing about, like, you're setting your target, your reduction target, you have a percentage. Is it a relative to your, you know, like budget, or is it an absolute value? Like, some organizations choose one, some choose the others. There's not really a good or a right or wrong answer, but how to think about it is not so easy when you started on your journey. And so since we've spent the past 2 years having those conversations, we think, like, putting this on paper and having, you know, for a new organization, being able to read, like, the pros and cons of each option and then make an informed decision would also have some value for the sector. Yeah, and I think then we have a question, like Slido. So yeah, like, as I said, that's what I was saying earlier. But if you have anything else where you think, you know, that the working group could think about something, or like discuss or produce or share something that you find difficult and that, like, you're not sure we're working on, like, do provide suggestions. And if you don't have any idea right now, you can always write to us. We have email address. I'm not sure if it's written on the so this will come. Thanks. Don't hesitate as well to put it in the chat, or yeah. Peter.
Hi, this is Peter Schmid from People in Need. Just you were asking for suggestions about, like, what your working group could focus on. I joined a little bit later, so apologies if you were mentioning this earlier. But the humanitarian carbon calculator, like, has a certain number of emissions factors, like, for a certain scope of activities. But it is naturally limited. Yeah? There are like several hundred of emission factors, and often when we, for example, replace one, let's say, more carbon intensive item for less intensive item or service, it's very difficult for us to find the emission factor of the given service or of the given product. And what would really help us if we would have access to some places like reliable, easy to use databases of many more emission factors, like where you could find like thousands of emissions factors for various things. Because also in the humanitarian carbon calculator, quite a few of the so-called activities are in fact like groups of various items and various services that you might be purchasing. And so the precision of the emission factor is quite limited, because there are like averages of emission factors of, I don't know, different types of stationaries and consumables and so on, for example. So apologies if you mentioned that earlier, but if you have not, my suggestion would be to provide much more, to provide like links to these databases of emission factors.
Thank you for your, like, that I wish we had a link to a database of thousands of emission factors. I think there are some that exist, but that are you must pay to access them, and so we don't have access. And then, yeah, like, thanks, Julia. That's the first step. But yeah, so, but we're taking your point, I think, even if we don't have such an easy link, there's something that also we can work on. All right, so thanks. And as I said, like, if you have other ideas later, please put them in the chat, and then we can move to our last part.
So just to finish with, we just wanted to, I guess, acknowledge and mention a few of the challenges that I think we're seeing for both the working group and the wider sector in terms of reducing our carbon footprint. First of all, and obviously the impact of institutional aid cuts recently and those that are coming down the line. There are obviously huge funding needs to finance the NGO transition, both investment for organisations in low carbon solutions and for the various initiatives that the working group is planning, for example, the carbon toolkit. And that also requires staff resources as well to drive the change within our organisations. And I think we all recognise what a huge piece of work it is to always monitor and measure our carbon emissions as well. So dedicated staff on that. As has been mentioned already, there are some specific kind of challenges in terms of calculating our carbon footprint, in terms of the data quality, uncertainties in methodologies, and the lack of specific emissions factors, particularly for countries in the global south. I know that there are efforts underway to address this. For example, the ICRC and Climate Action Accelerator have a life cycle assessment project ongoing to better define emissions for specific humanitarian goods, but regardless, it is still very limited. I think in a lot of organisations, we're seeing a fair bit of resistance to change across the sector. I think to effectively reduce our carbon footprint, it's really going to require a change in the way we operate. And I think our sector is not very good at that. Having said that, I think there are opportunities with the huge changes that we're seeing at the moment in the sector. It's important to remember that, reducing our environmental footprint or our carbon footprint can also reduce costs, particularly in the short term. So I think that is something that people may become increasingly interested in as we move forward. And just to finish, I think for a lot of organisations, choosing and prioritising which carbon reduction measures to focus on, which will have the most impact, and understanding their kind of real cost is a challenge. And then just finally, in many of the countries in which we work, obviously the availability and cost of low carbon goods and equipment can be quite limited. They're not always available from our suppliers or in the markets in which we work, or infrastructure may not be in place to support that. So yeah, a few things to think about going forward. Next slide. So yeah, I think a last question for you from us is just to, I guess, better understand what challenges you are facing in your organisations in terms of trying to measure and reduce your carbon footprint.
And if you want to raise your hand and comment, don't hesitate as well.
Also, sorry, it's a workload, so the fewest words you write, the better you'll understand, because otherwise we might split up our answer. So if you have lots to say, you can put it in the chat or raise your hand.
So yeah, good to see that many of the challenges that you're facing are the ones that we notice, human resources, emissions factors. Not sure what some of these mean. Criteria.
Yeah,
I guess
think they've been
frequency of
split.
measurement. Perfect.
I guess
Long flights
a
for
way of
deployment.
avoiding the word cloud, splitting your answer is to type it as one word.
Long flights for deployments. Yeah, I think that's reducing our travel emissions is something I think we're all struggling with. And getting that kind of behavioral change and cultural change as well, I think is tricky.
And I think linked to what Julia was saying just before, this is also where maybe the current time might be an opportunity. Like in HI, we had planned on a very ambitious target for reduction of flight emissions for 2025. And obviously this year is gonna, like, you know, we'll see some reduction, but more under like budgetary constraints than because of sudden environmental, you know, realization. And what we're focusing on in the organization is to say, you know, as we are this year having to prioritize and to really look at all of our travel and decide whether or not we have, you know, within the constrained budgets, what to prioritize and how to make those really tough decisions. We can really learn from that process and try to formalize how we make those decisions and how we decide, you know, what is worth putting our money behind. But then, you know, in a hopeful future where our budgets are not as constrained as they are right now, we can still take those learnings and those criteria for prioritization and apply them to make decisions this time to reduce the footprint of flights. And I think that's something that didn't happen post-COVID, where in COVID, like basically everything was cut just because borders were closed. And so there was no decision making. There was no thinking about why to cut this travel and not that one. And so after borders reopened, we just restarted traveling. And this is something to, I think, learn as well from in this tough year, to like remember how we made the decisions. Yeah, Alexandre.
Yeah, hello, and thank you for this very enlightening module. In terms of challenges, if I go back just to the pure exercise of carbon footprint calculation, so we calculated 2019. We just finalized the calculation of 2023, and now we just don't know what to do with this figure. Suddenly we have this number. So, you know, spoiler alert, it increased, but you know how to use it as a governance to steer our organization. It's been a few weeks now that we just don't know what to do with that. We're probably not on. It's not even. But so in that is a question of the target, of the intensity of the competition of priorities with other things. Just we are like a chicken in front of a knife, you know, comme une poule devant un couteau, with this new figure, and yeah, we still don't really know what to do with that. So, that's. I just wanted to share this little insight of my organization.
Thanks, Alexandre. Yeah, I think that's something that many will face. Aline?
Yeah, just to echo what Alexandre has just said, I think there is the challenge is to define a way to monitor our carbon footprint while rationalizing our effort and the human resources. We know that we'll have a limited time and limited budget to dedicate to this. And so should we like update the carbon footprint and do a carbon accounting every year? And we know that it's a lot of work, or should we instead like maybe have a like do our carbon accounting every 3 or 5 years? But then how can we monitor our decarbonization pathway? And one idea would be to have another methodology to do a slide carbon accounting, like every year, just to follow up the main emission sources. I think we should deepen this this idea and try to see if we can establish and develop a methodology like in twofold. I don't know if it makes sense. Thanks.
Thanks, Aline. Peter?
Yeah, this is once more Peter from People in Need. I just would like to respond to what Aline and Alexander were saying and share our experience. So we did a carbon accounting using the Humanitarian Carbon Calculator for 2020 to 2022, and it has been a very time-consuming and therefore also financially quite demanding experience. And we understand that the HCC is kind of the ideal because it really covers absolutely everything what goes through your accountancy. But then when we received the final figure, we were in a slightly a similar situation as Alexander described. And one of the reasons was because we realized that actually the percentage of the emissions that we can, of our carbon footprint, that we can influence directly is relatively small, because the vast majority of our carbon footprint came from the cash that we provide, or the cash and voucher assistance. And so only about, I think we analyzed that only about 10% of the footprint is what we can actually influence, what relates to our logistics and so on. And then some of our colleagues were quite rightfully saying, okay, so why have we invested or why to keep investing so much time into calculating something that we cannot really influence much? And so in the end, our conclusion was that we will focus on calculating only the activities that we are able to influence directly, where we are able to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And actually it was we felt that it helped us like a huge rock falling off our shoulders. We felt quite relieved because it made the calculation much easier. And also now we know that when we get a figure, we can really do something to decrease the figure, which is something that we were not able to do when we included everything in the calculation.
Thanks. I think that's an important reflection. I know some things we've also been discussing within the working group about how to look at our targets and what to focus on as well. Nora.
Thanks, Peter. I think that was really helpful and spot on reflection, and that certainly echoes what we're hearing from many of our partners, right? It's complex, it's time intensive, and then what we see at the end is a large chunk is scope 3. Well, it might be cash assistance, or it might just be scope 3, which is just also harder to influence, right? Because you need to work with your suppliers and so on, which is not easy. So I think the approach you're describing is valid. And generally speaking, I mean, the carbon calculation official guidelines out there, and this is also what we say, is it is absolutely valid even to start small, right? To say, okay, in the first year, we start with scope 1 and scope 2, for example. And we know that scope 3 is huge for humanitarian orgs and for many, but it is valid to start small. And even within scope 3, to select the categories that you will and will not focus on, because most organizations have a general idea, right? They have a general idea of we do a lot of cash-based assistance, or we don't actually purchase relief items, so that really excludes a whole bunch of categories. So and advice is it is valid to start small as long as you're extremely transparent about what you are excluding and why. And it's a good idea before you delve into the deep end of carbon calculation to do a general reflection of your organization, supply chain, business, whatever you want to call it. Where are likely hotspots, and then you can already exclude some things, because even in the humanitarian carbon calculator, there are some tabs which you can probably ignore, and that already makes it easier. For example, the least assets part. So just some reflections from my part of what might be helpful in doing this exercise.
Yeah, I think the point made by Peter was very interesting, and And I think many of us, and that's also maybe what Aline was hinting at, but many of us are you could also have like intermediate options, like, okay, I'll do a full carbon footprint every X years, maybe 4. And then in between, I'll focus on, just a few, like those emissions that I'm, like in HI, for example, we are choosing to focus on where we are putting action plans. So those ones we'll monitor very closely in between. But then we were initially planning on doing very regular updates of our carbon footprint, and we realized it would just take too much. And I see that it's 11 and we have, well, in France at least, it's the end of the hour. A lot of people leaving us. So yeah, thanks to everyone for the chat, very interesting contributions and all the engagement. And if you want to continue the conversation and you have more suggestions or questions for us, don't hesitate to write us at carbon@environnementhumanitaire.org. And yeah, we hope to hear from you and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much to everyone.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.